Again, why we're doing this. The 59 corridor and the railroad is actually, and you'll see an aerial here in a minute, it does a really good job of splitting the city in half. And in some ways that means that there's opportunities to create a difference in character on each side of the freeway, but in other ways, we need to figure out how to bring the city back together. There are facilities and residents and business on the south side, there are facilities, residents, and business on the north side, and yet there's a very large, very noisy occurrence going right through the middle of the town. And obviously we've not just this an economic downturn here in the recent years, but maybe in the past decade and even longer, Kendleton has not seen the kind of growth that other communities have that are on the freeways. Because if you think about it, the freeways act as nodes. And as a planner, we try and space those things out accordingly and put the right businesses in the right place, and you need to have a Buc-ee's every so often, that kind of thing. But what's appropriate to build in the Kendleton area so that it is an identity? Because if you're coming from the south, Kendleton is the gateway to Fort Bend County. And we talked about that quite a bit, and creating some kind of historical context to you are entering something special. You're entering one of the most fantastic counties in Texas and even in the U.S. And so how can we advertise that more, make it more palatable for people to visit Kendleton, stay in Kendleton for a period of time, and use the facilities that are going to be available to persons who are visiting. The interesting thing, and again, I mentioned that I'm originally from here. Back when I was in high school, you know that you didn't speed through Kendleton. I mean, that was... Well, they haven't had a police force in what, maybe a decade?
Yeah, at least.
But that preconception still lives on today. And we need to figure out how to overcome those with the new development and create a new stigma, a positive one for Kendleton. But still don't speak. But and then I mentioned this, the amount of participation from the citizens throughout this entire process has been tremendous. And we wouldn't have been able to do this without some of the people that have come today to see the unveiling of this plan. Their input has really given me the insight to what this community has been and allowed us to tailor what our recommendations are so that we can keep that fabric intact. As I mentioned, we started with a community development block grant approved by Commissioners Court, and the whole process really of creating one of these plans has a lot to do with meeting as many people as you can. And I probably didn't hit everybody, but I hit as many as I could, and we'll probably hit a few more here in the next couple of weeks before we go to City Council for adoption. But it's a very involved interview process, community outreach meetings. We also had a steering committee that met on a monthly basis. We all got to know each other very well. We had really great meetings out at the Fort Bend Heritage Society Museum, which I encourage everybody to go visit. It's a fantastic museum in Bates Island Park. We got the opportunity to take many of the steering committee members on a tour up to Bryan, and my associate here, Joan Quintana with Teeks, gave a wonderful tour of an African American history museum in Bryan and downtown Bryan, so that you can see what the implementation looks like after you dream a little bit. And because really what we're doing right now is dreaming, and this plan we're going to give into Kendleton, they're going to have a series of attainable goals, and what does that look like? And so that was a very important part of the process. Joan may talk about that a little bit later. We added a couple of things in the process. We managed to, in coordination with Texas Southern University, do a program for the city council members, and we went and had a great day, a full day of just education about city governance and presentation on planning. This is the very beginning of our master planning process. And then, unfortunately, something came up that Kendleton was on the list for post office closure. And we took a significant amount of time to address that issue. The community itself was actually the ones that started the groundswell of, you know what, this is a very important portion of our community. We have to figure out how to preserve this. A community without a post office may be less of a community. That's the emotional feeling of that. And it may be appropriate. And so the community got together rapidly, garnered a lot of support, and in fact, we managed to pull some heartstrings on the post office officials at the end of the day. Actually, Commissioner, would you mind saying just a little bit about what we ended up doing there with the post office?
Well, it's a nationwide budget cut that the post office is doing, and we ended up talking to the Postmaster General here for the Houston region. And what he said, of course, they have to make these presentations all over the place and tell the rural communities that they're closing their post office. And when they had the meeting at Kendleton, got back through the post office, which is over there in North Houston, that was the best meeting anyone has ever been to, and how positive the community was, and how that they wanted to keep the post office open. They don't get to make the final call, but they're going to recommend that Kendleton remains open, because the Kendleton community meeting on the support of keeping the post office open was such a positive meeting that the people that didn't go to that meeting and went to other meetings were actually jealous that they couldn't go to that one. And so it was a very positive experience for everybody involved.
It was, and again, that meeting was the same tone as all the community outreach meetings that we had. Very involved citizens who really wanted to participate in the process, so we ended up getting a lot of good information. I'm going to ask Joan to elaborate on that a little bit while she goes through some of her slides.
All right, well, thanks, Chris. I'm going to stay here just because it's easier, frankly. Make it easier on myself. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you, and let me just kind of give a little bit of background. I first came to know Kendleton through a very long conversation and introduction via Boucher Mickey, and that was, I think, after a conversation that I had with the governor's office when they called and said, hey, look, you work in rural economic development. This is a community that has some big things coming their way. They need a plan. And so with that, I'll just let you know that it has been my pleasure for about the last 5 years to work with the Texas Engineering Extension Service and head up our programs in economic innovation, particularly for rural communities. And most of you, I imagine, have been in this region for a period of time, long enough to know that this once was, and in many ways still is, a rural region that we're in today. Many of the communities that I've had the pleasure to work with across Texas are remote and rural, so their challenges are somewhat different. So when I spoke with Boucher that day and I learned about what was coming to Kendleton, I realized we had a very different challenge on our hands, because where most rural communities are desperately seeking somebody to look their direction, Kendleton found itself in a position where they had perhaps more on their plate than they might be able to handle. And that's a great opportunity. It's a fantastic opportunity. When you learn about the population of the community, it's a very, very small community, remote to Houston in some ways, but close to Houston in others. We were faced with really an exciting opportunity to help a small town grow, and grow in a way that was intentional, purposeful, and really fit with their values. So a theme that you've already heard from Commissioner Morrison and from Chris, and I'm going to reinforce, is just sort of the mightiness of this tiny little town, and their just sheer will to do two things. One, growth. So they're embracing the growth. And two, remain who they are. That's brave. That's brave of them. And they are absolutely 100% all in on those 2 points. So when I met them for the first time, I drove down, and it was really a surreal day. So I work for the state, right? And so we had to get a rental car, and they put me, I do this all the time, okay? And that day, the rental car company put me in a Beetle, a VW Beetle. And if you know me at all, you know I am directionally challenged. So despite the fact that I drive all over the state of Texas, routinely, there's never a trip without a U-turn. So when I got to Kendleton, I really wasn't sure if I had arrived. But I had, and that's just my way of telling you, this is a tiny town, and I we were meeting at the church, which proved to be really, really significant. We met at the church. I was all by myself, this little blonde woman, and I thought I was meeting with about 3 people, but no, okay? And this proved to be the case over and over. There was an entire community there ready to tell me how this was gonna be, okay? And I was ready to listen. The folks in Kendleton, I'm so proud to see how many of you are here. They are a force to be reckoned with. They have a plan. All we have done, all Chris and I have done, is help them articulate it, help them get organized. And it has been a pleasure to do that. And one of the very early questions that is indicative of the spirit and the determination of Kendleton that I received was, now wait a minute, we're not going to stop to plan, are we? We're not going to stop progress because we've got things to do. And I was like, amen, you do. You have things to do. So by no means is this planning process intended to slow you down in any way. They wouldn't be slowed down. They have not been slowed down. And in fact, I'm going to go through the very highest points of the strategy from an economic development perspective that has emerged. And you will note, and I will point out, that many of these things are already underway. So just to kind of give you a sense of where I come from, up the points that you see on the screen, when we're working with rural communities, the challenges are very different than they are for your metropolitan areas. Resources are extremely limited. Human capital is limited. Everybody wears multiple hats. So how on earth are they to compete in capturing business? How are they to compete in capturing resources? It's an incredible challenge. Everybody has to come to the table and be prepared to kind of march to the same drummer, if you will. So sound strategy, having a plan in place is absolutely critical. Taking on that regional perspective. So many communities in Texas want to just worry about themselves. Look, we're a football state. That's just how it is. So many lines are drawn on that, and it's just not allowed. You can't do that and be successful economically. So looking at things regionally, looking at the market, really identifying assets, we help with that because so many communities don't recognize what they have. Kendleton has an abundance of assets. I'll talk about that in a minute. Maximizing those, looking at relationships, that's what today is about. So just in case you don't know it, I will state this for Kendleton. We're here to get all of you on Kendleton's side, okay? We're here to promote Kendleton shamelessly, proudly. This community is going places. Trust me, you'll want to be with them because they're going places and going fast. So we got to have those relationships for this community. Any community has to have them. Those partnerships that emerge, they're already underway in Kendleton. We're excited about that. And then, of course, that informed and engaged leadership. The leadership in Kendleton is engaged, absolutely engaged. Helping them be more informed, that's what some of that training was about, so that they can do the best for their community. So just looking more locally, I talked about assets and market demands and understanding how to make the most of those strategic relationships. Chris already talked about what's happening, and you're here in Fort Bend County. You know what's happening. You know what's